Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dr. Shahzad Jiva, Director, Aga Khan University Examination Board, distinguished members of the Aga Khan University Examination Board, educators, colleagues, and friends, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning to everyone. I'm always very humbled by an opportunity to speak to educators because I know that the real educator is each and every one of you sitting here in this hall. This is a combination, a powerful combination, a powerhouse of knowledge, commitments, competencies, and experience. So I may know just a little bit about educational leadership, but I know that each and every one of you knows much more. So thank you very, very much once again to each and every one of my esteemed colleagues at the Aga Khan University Examination Board with whom I have had a long association. And I will, if you permit me, Dr. Shahzad Jiva, tell one or two personal stories along the way. But I'm indeed extremely privileged to be here. I think conferences such as these are moments for reflection and stock-taking. These conferences pull us away like a magnet from the everyday, extremely busy world that each educator lives in. It brings us together to think, rethink, recharge ourselves, explore intellectually new areas, new avenues, new learnings, and to recommit ourselves. So conferences reaffirm much of what we know. They re-advocate for values and commitments in case we've lost some steam along the way. And they open up vast new vistas for us to think differently and become the transformational leaders that we always pledge ourselves to be. So let me start with a little personal story. Since my late and beloved mother, Nasra Wazir was introduced here, I must tell you that when I came back from the United States armed with my degrees, and I went to her, and by then the Education Trust Nasra School had one campus only. And I said, can I become the principal? Now I'm qualified. And she looked at me and she said, certainly not. I said, why not? She said, first you go out there and teach. You learn what the education process is all about, what teaching learning is about, what children are about, what environment is about. Once you've understood that, then maybe you can come back here and apply for a teaching job. So I was very disappointed at first, but being somewhat adventurous always, I said, all right, what should I do? She said, go to Lyari. But before you go to Lyari, go to the government office and we'll help you a little bit. We'll get you an appointment with somebody in the government and offer your services voluntarily to go and teach in one of the government primary or middle schools. It so happened, it worked out, and I was asked to go and teach in a school in Lyari, which was like a street school. I'm now talking about 1965. It was school 242 or 243, I can't quite remember the number, but that's what it was. It was a street with a sewage line passing by, 2 rooms on the ground floor of a building. Must have been about 38 children there. Mixed grade teaching, 1 teacher, not even enough of a blackboard or chalkboard, no chairs, of course, no tables, and the 2 rooms are very dilapidated. But I learned a lot. I learned how to develop some materials, how to engage every child. And the thing that inspired me most of all was that despite all the difficulties of the lives of the people there, because some children did not have shoes, but the mothers had sent them. They had sent them with some hope. So for me, I think always a fundamental value of being an educator is that children come to you. It may be mechanical every day. picking up their lunch boxes at home, carrying their lunch bag, and coming to you. But the hope is there. They are the embodiment of the hope of their parents, the hope for a better life, the hope for a better future, the hope for an educated person, the hope for a change in society. And that's really what inspired me continuously. I don't know if I taught them well or badly. I did whatever I could do. But it was an experience, and then I came back and I worked at the Nasra schools. I worked as a primary school teacher, then as a secondary and so forth, and then I was given some management responsibilities. But that was the initial journey. And I don't want to take too much time on it, except to say that one of the questions, I think, for us, many of whom through the teaching path end up being managers of education institutions, being administrators. A central question often is, in order to be a good educational leader, or a principal, I would say, and a manager and an administrator of a school, do you have to be a good teacher? Should you have been a teacher in order to be a successful principal? And there are two debates in the country. One debate says that the managers are a separate cadre, and they need to know management skills. They need to know how to recruit well, how to organize their budgets, how to manage their time and facilities, etc., etc. And another debate says no. The manager is just an enabler. The manager is to provide, or the principal is to provide, just an enabling environment so that the teaching-learning process can take place, so that the teacher can do the best job possible for her in the classroom. I think, frankly, it's a composite. Personally, I feel that if you've been a teacher in the classroom, you really can become a much better principal and a much better manager and a much better administrator, because until you have experienced the process of engaged learning and teaching, which is the theme of today's conference, unless you've been an actor in it, a participant, a teacher, you cannot really become an competent principal. You may be an efficient principal, but you cannot be a transformational principal. So for me, I think that that message is very, very clear. I also want to share with you some time ago that I was reading one of the indexes about professions in the world, and I was really surprised to read this. It said the highest stress profession is that of a pilot. That makes some sense. He's got about 200 people whose lives are in the palm of his hand. And the next high-stress position is the teachers. And I reread that, and I said, how is that? So I thought, maybe they don't mean high stress. They really mean high value. And that is true. It is a high-value position, and it is a high stress in this sense that every single minute of the teacher in the classroom with the student means that that student's life is in the hand of the teacher. And every day you interact with 30 students, 50, 100, and a principal interacts with many more. Imagine how many lives you are guiding. You are really the pilot of that child's life. And you are piloting that child into a future about which, despite all our technology and forecasting, we still cannot imagine what it will be like. Sitting here, I don't think we could have imagined that 30 years prior to this, we lived without cell phones and television and so forth. So we really don't know the future, but we're all on this journey. And you are the pilots, and you've got thousands of children who are in the palm of your hand. So clearly, I think it is the teacher who is the transformational agent, and everything else is really what assists the teacher, who then becomes a principal and an educational leader. And today's conference is really about educational leadership. I will take a little bit of your time, if you permit me, to lay out what the education scenario is like, a little bit of it, not deeply investigative presentation, but some facts that always tend to jolt us into recognizing what is the status of education in Pakistan and what is the environment in which we all work. because the landscape of Pakistan is certainly something that we are not always conscious of. To start with, of course, I do feel that Chesterton is one person who articulated extremely well what the educational leadership journey was like, or the role of educational leaders is. And it's something that I'm sure that you have all perhaps read. I hope you do believe in it, that education is simply the soul of a society as it passes from one generation to another. And learning should focus on values, attitudes, and behaviors which enable children or individuals to learn to live together in a world characterized by diversity and pluralism. More than ever before, today, I think, schools are a place that must understand microcosm and macrocosm both, because societal change is demanding that we ensure that it is not just about textbook knowledge. Actually, it never has been just about textbook knowledge, but it is much, much more about values, skills, and changing society. So then, what is the 21st century going to require? Here are some of the skills, certainly, which are also espoused by the Aga Khan University Examination Board. This is what you look at when you examine students: critical thinking, good communication, the ability to communicate. Collaboration is, of course, for educator leaders in order to collaborate well so that an effective teaching learning process can take place. It really is important to ensure that the subtext, if not the main text, in the classrooms is also about cultural diversity and pluralism, and to respect that in our teaching methodologies and our teaching approaches. Creativity and innovation, and I know the Aga Khan Examination Board looks for those minds that are creative, especially when you're asking them examination questions, particularly in language, literature, and the arts. Creativity for learning, connectivity for learning, critical. Citizenship, this is the ethical value. The moral values, commitment to your society, to your neighbor, your community, your country, your friends. To me, I think this is a foundation stone, really, of the value system of an individual. Character, that completes some of the skills of the 21st century. And so what does Fullan have to say? One of the great instructional leaders himself and the great educator. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a thinker, and he says the role of the principal has shifted from being that of a gatekeeper to that of an instructional leader. And that, without doubt, I'm sure we believe in that. The principal is not the gatekeeper. In fact, there should be no gatekeepers. I think that's a very traditional approach about a very restrictive management arrangement. So let us now go to Pakistan. These are wonderful, inspirational thoughts. So what does Pakistan's landscape look like? Very divided. Private sector, public sector, high fee charging, low fee charging, trusts, societies, foundations, and madrasas. It's not one landscape. We talk about equity, equity of opportunity, and the constitutional amendment 25A is guaranteeing that, but we are not able actually to give equity of opportunity in this sort of an educational landscape. But this is where we are. So what is the enrollment in the public? What's happened here? Yeah. In the public sector, I don't want for you to worry about reading large figures, but if you look at the numbers in all of Pakistan in primary, middle, and high school, they add up. The latest number is almost 180,000. That's a very, very large number of schools, an extremely large number of schools, some large size, some small, but nevertheless, this is where it's all happening. The total enrollment in primary schools alone is 17.6%, which is larger than many, many countries. That alone, just that population, of which 56% are boys and 44% are girls. And that indicator on girls is certainly a hopeful one. This is the public-private sector distribution. As you can see, private sector is growing very rapidly, and many of the principals here, or most of them here, and educational leaders are from the private sector. It is private sector that is driving change, and there is a lot of evidence on that. It is private sector that is leading and pioneering, and the examination board of the Khan University is one excellent example of that. Society and private sector doing things, and the state is following. And if we had looked at these figures earlier, they were really much reduced. If you had seen the data about 10 years ago, private sector was not at about 31% institutions or 37% enrollments. In fact, Mrs. Nasreen Kasuri, the leader of the Beacon House School, the chairperson, said the other day at a large educators gathering in Islamabad that their calculation was that there were 43% enrollments today in the private sector. So 43% enrollments means that the private sector is playing a role almost as large as that of government. And 43% of your population today is in some excellent schools, and some average and medium schools, and in some very low quality and low performing schools. But it is a critical mass which increasingly places the responsibilities on the shoulders of private sector managers. A quick look at Sindh. The total number of teachers in Sindh is about 96,000, 97,000, which is a large number. Registered institutions are 11,000 or so. These are all the various divisions of Sindh. And you can also see that there are different boards that govern the different school systems. Here. So we are not all actually responding to the same set of regulations and requirements. This is a bit of an eye-opener. 35,000 madrasas in Pakistan, 3.5 million students. In Sindh, there's geotagging of madrasas going on, and as you can see, 7,723 madrasas have been tagged. Several have been sealed, and many others are yet to be registered. I wanted to just show you those numbers just to indicate that we live in a very mixed landscape, that the challenges are enormous, and that when we have educational leaders' workshops, conferences, we're all not speaking from the same point of reference. We have multiple different points of reference. Under-resourced classrooms, small-scale schools, untrained teachers, untrained heads, ranging all the way to the top, which are the top of the line, the well-resourced, well-established, well-experienced and competently qualified educators, those schools as well. Another myth, actually, that is exploding over the last couple of years is that the public sector no longer gives low salaries. It reinforces and compensates its public sector education leaders, principals, quite reasonably. From 70,000 rupees to at least 100,000 rupees is the salary of an educational leader, a head of a school in the public sector, whereas private sector ranges from 15,000 or so all the way to 200,000. So you can see the quality of personnel and the quality of intellectual and human resources and management resources that Pakistan is dealing with. Now, what are the models within which you have to work as educational leaders? If you're in the public sector, it's a very, very hierarchical top-down model, very centralized, very little freedom. And so much as we may talk about transformational leadership, what real freedom does a public sector government school head have? How much control over the curriculum? How much control over questions in the examination? How much control about new learning techniques, teaching techniques? Assessments, very little control. So there is a very large body of educators across Pakistan, and this is a national conference. So as we sit here today, we must not think just Karachi. We must think Pakistan. And if we think Pakistan, the large majority of our students who are in school systems, which really are regulated in a very hierarchical manner, leaves very little room for transformational education leadership. Now, the government or the non-government low-cost private schools, as well as others, certainly have much more freedom. Even the smaller school has more freedom. It's much more individually led entrepreneurship, locally managed, staffing, budgeting decisions are made by the educational leader, and there is a response to the market demand. So these are defining characteristics. Of course, very little opportunity for professional development. And as you know, the data tells us that the vast majority of private sector heads, principals, senior teachers in the middle to low fee charging schools are not trained. They are still not trained, but they are managing schools. In the high cost private sector, the principle is where there's a possibility and a very good potential for transformational leadership. I think we're all inspired by changes that have been taking place even in some of the low-fee charging schools where there are transformational leaders. I would not like to make any general statements, but it is largely in the better resource schools that you're beginning to see leadership be innovative, be creative, be transformational. So the challenge before all of us is, how do you do it when you're not a well-resourced school? The high-cost private sector has all of these defining characteristics and many more. So what do some of our educational leaders across the world have to say? They really talk about quality. Quality is at the core of the leadership process in education. And the central question about quality is, how do you ensure quality and scale? I think that if there is any major challenge for Pakistan, it is how do you ensure that you can introduce quality, maintain quality, and yet go to scale. Because scale is what we need in Pakistan. So de Groot, as you know, who's a great educational thinker and an economist who has also talked about the impact of and the interplay between the economy and social systems, says the quality of education depends primarily on the way schools are managed, more than on the abundance of available resources, and that the capacity of schools to improve teaching and learning is strongly influenced by the quality of leadership provided by the head teacher. However, I think he's speaking largely to the context of the Western or the well-developed world, because when our schools are not adequately resourced, it is really difficult to be a transformational leader. So let me share with you what the world is looking at as the key standards for educational leaders, and there are 10 of them. I think this presentation can also be sent by email to everyone, so you don't have to write them down. And there's nothing particularly new, but they are articulated well. So if you see yourself as an educational leader, these are the areas I think that you really do need to think about. What is really your mission, vision, and the core values? And is it in alignment with the mission, vision, and core values of the institution in which you work? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. Are you conscious of ethics and professional standards? Ensuring equity and cultural responsiveness, and for Pakistan, I think this is a key point. Curriculum instruction and assessment, which is the heart of the Education Examination Board. Community of care and support of students, that's the environment, professional capacity. These are all the attributes that you have to think of if you are an educational leader. Senior teacher, headmaster, headmistress, principal, or administrator. Professional community, building that professional community. And that professional community is not just teachers and staff in your own school. It is this professional community that is sitting here. This is really where we need to connect with each other and build that common professional community. And of course, families, engagement, operations and management, and to move towards school improvement. Finally, I always did like what John Quincy Adams had said. If your actions, and I would say here, as an educational leader, inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. And I do think that everyone in this hall really does reflect that. I want to leave you really with just that thought, that each and every one of us really can do more. And if you can do more and inspire others to do more, then you are a leader. Thank you very much.